Hello, today is December 26th, 2012, and you are listening to I Think You Think, a podcast that puts a new spin on debate and discussion. I'm Justin, and on the other side of my computer screen is James.
Hello, folks.
And we are your hosts and carry no credentials worth noting. I Think You Think is a podcast that focuses on what we, your hosts, think, but also what you think. Too many times we spend debates and discussions talking past one another and not enough time trying to learn and understand why someone thinks what they think. This is what makes I Think You Think different, because we are focused on why people think the way they do and why we think the way we do. James and I believe that the forum of ideas should be open to everyone, and everyone should have the opportunity to challenge and be challenged by ideas. We are not here to pass judgment, but merely discuss ideas and topics. This podcast, first and foremost, is a conversation between us, and hopefully you. If you'd like to participate, please feel free to email us at ithinkyoutthink2012@gmail.com. You may also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ithink.youthink or on Tumblr at ithinkyouthinkpodcast.tumblr.com. If there are any links to any relevant topics, we will also post those on our Tumblr. I Think You Think is produced by StolenArts Productions and is recorded live at Fisher International Studios. How are you doing this post-Christmas day, James?
Oh, I am doing very well, very well. I enjoyed my Christmas very much. Got to spend many hours with the family. Always fantastic. How was your Christmas?
It was very good. I got several gifts that I was obviously expecting because I had purchased them for myself and my wife wrapped them. And then some other ones that I was not expecting, but were still very good. A brand spanking new camera from my in-laws that my wife and I will be using on our trip in Florida. Oh my goodness. On our trip in February to Wales, the UK.
That's nowhere near Florida, if you
Not
weren't sure about that.
Yeah. Just in case you didn't know, we
Yes.
did check on that, and those are not near each other. So my brother got me this great card game. I know you were eagerly awaiting to know what he had gotten me. It's a fun card game that I will enjoy immensely. It's kind of like what it refers to itself as a diceless RPG style card game. So as a pretty big fan of role-playing games, I will definitely look forward to playing this. I just will have to find someone to play with me.
I'm sure it won't be too difficult.
Yeah. Players 3 to 6. Wow. I got to find 2 other people to play with me.
Oh, man. Okay, the pressure's on now.
It is. It is, in fact. So we have a pretty big topic that we wanted to just kind of dive right into. And we're really going to just see where it goes. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. Probably not enough time to talk about it all in. But we'll just kind of dive in and see where the current takes us.
It's a heavy topic, and I do want to talk about it, but at the same time, there's so much involved in it that it does, it's a heavy subject, and I'm hesitant as much as I'm eager to have this conversation with you.
Well, let's dive in with something pretty straightforward. I think is a easy sort of step. First of all, for those who this may be your first podcast listening to ours I recommend going back and starting again. This is only podcast number 4, so you're not too far behind. But we did mention last week we wanted to talk about the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School and the shooting there. As we know, a lot has come out since this took place. Adam Lanza was the alleged perpetrator. Well, I don't think it's it's hard to necessarily say what it's alleged because there's never going to be a trial.
I don't think it is anymore. I think they've pretty much confirmed with everything that it was definitely him. It doesn't seem like there's any dispute about it any longer.
This gentleman, from what I understand, shot and killed his mother, who was a teacher or what was she?
She worked at the school. I've mixed things. Was she a teacher? Was she a volunteer? Because I guess she didn't need to work. But But I think a lot of that's kind of secondary. He did kill his mother, who had connection to the school, who worked there before he went there himself.
Yes, and basically walked through the school and ended up killing 20 children,
And 6 adults.
6 adults, so 26 total, and then killed himself as well. So while there's a lot to talk about in regards to that and the reasoning behind it and everything, I'm more sort of interested in at least starting with something a little softer, and that's the the National Rifle Association, also known as the NRA, had a press conference shortly after, um, and did you listen to the whole thing?
I didn't. I happened to be getting in my car and it had already started. So I did hear a decent amount of it, um, but I did not hear the entirety of it. Although I do presently have the full text in front of me on my computer just to have it handy if need be for reference.
Right. I did listen to most of it. I don't think I listened to probably the last 5 minutes. I just listened to it on YouTube, um, just to get kind of an idea of what they were saying. You had listened to it first, um, and had let me know, that I should listen to it. And they kind of touched on a couple of different things. Their suggestions for how to prevent tragedies like this from happening in the future, what they believe to be the causes of things like this. Um, and I mean, this is the first time that this kind of has happened. There was Columbine when I was in high school. You're a little older than me, so you were out of high school, I'm sure, at that point.
I was, yes.
And there was the Kent State shootings that always still draws a crowd on the anniversary of it, for people as remembrance. I mean, these aren't they're not new things.
Yeah, I was doing a little research on this in general earlier today. And there have been two more like violence at schools that were I can't even say worse because worse isn't right. Like Virginia Tech, there were more people that were injured and killed. And then in 1927, there was Bath School in Bath Township, Michigan, where 45 people were killed and I think 58 injured, something along those lines. Um, so, I mean, I don't know. I mean, they're all awful tragedies. But yeah, I mean, we have as a culture, and this is not an American thing. When I was looking this up, Germany, Japan, Sri Lanka, all around the world over the years, there's been violence that happens in schools.
Well, there was even a stabbing that had taken place only days difference in
Right.
Japan, I believe, around the same time as Sandy Hook. And it was also kind of there was, 19, 20 some kids that were wounded.
I mean, we have these, there's Columbine, there's a lot, the Virginia Tech. They're very well known because they're more recent, and there's each tragedies in their own rights. But getting back to some of the stuff the NRA people were saying, you know, they want it seemed like they wanted to do that thing that people want to do when there's an outrageous moment of violence that happens, something that is completely just tragic and awful, and say it's the video games, it's the movies, and that drives me crazy. I I don't know how someone can point at those things and say that is the thing and not
Yeah.
reference so much more that's available. Because I mean, how many millions of people watch these movies? How many millions of people play these video games, and it never even crosses their mind to do something that is a fraction as awful and tragic as what happened in Sandy Hook. It would never, I mean, we've seen all these movies. I know I'm a movie fan. I see almost every movie that comes out, whether it's a romantic comedy or The Avengers or, I saw Bruno, and I'll never be able to get over that. But that's a whole other thing. There's a whole bunch of, I've seen a ton of movies, violent or otherwise. I played a lot of video games, like extremely violent to, just run of the mill, normal sort of games. And I would never even things like this never even crossed my mind. The only time they come into my mind is when something this tragic happens or when we're having this conversation. Um, so realistically, to point the finger, for someone to point the finger and say it's video games, it's movies, makes no sense to me. I mean, there were violent books as far back in time. I mean, I don't know, maybe back in the 1500s, if somebody did something violent and then they found a book, if they were even literate at that time, they found a book that had, violent content in it. Maybe they did point the finger at that. I don't know. But it just seems like a ridiculous jump to say that's it and ignore all the other things that to me seem more obviously like they would be it. Um, you know, the to me, it's about sort of your support system. What's your family like? How do they treat you? And your mental health, whether it's something that is more of a condition that just exists on its own or something that is developed just through, uh, the trials of life, I mean, either or. And I mean, not to say that any of those are an excuse for anything like this. Obviously, there's no excuse. Um, but that's what I would point my finger at first. That's what I would look at first before I would look at, did they play Grand Theft Auto? Did they see, whatever the biggest action movie over the past 5 years was, whatever. Um, I don't know. What would you think about that?
When I was listening to the NRA thing, I had some of the similar kinds of feelings that you had. The one thing that really disappoints me is I expect people to say it. The stuff about the video games, about the movies. I don't buy it. I can't imagine there's a lot of people out there that really do buy it. But what's really sad is that the NRA isn't even never once did they say the problem is, or one of the problems why this takes place is because um, because we don't have a long enough waiting period for guns, or um, we sell magazines that can hold 45 bullets in a single clip. There wasn't a single time in which they said, hey, maybe there's something we can kind of look at. Maybe there's some sort of issue that it's not just a media issue, or it's not just a mental health issue, that maybe these are all parts of one kind of thing that we can all kind of look at. As a person who I prize very highly free speech, I prize very highly the First Amendment, um, and even though there are games out there, and this isn't the first time that games have been brought up as a problem with why this takes place. I mean, they've brought there's been games out there that are very distasteful, but I recognize them as an art form, and even if I find it distasteful, I can at least understand why it's there and why someone did it. If these video games and movies and things like that are behind our desensitization to violence, to a certain extent, video games do desensitize us to violence. I don't think it desensitizes us to violence as much as I think the NRA was trying to say. Um, just because I play a video game and I kill a couple of hundred bad guys or aliens or something like that in a video game like Halo, doesn't mean that I equate human life, actual living humans, with a digital rendition of humanity or a person or anything. The thing I recognize is that there are people who could struggle with that, who do have a problem with conflating the two, and video games probably don't help a person like that if they have a mental health issue that is making it difficult for them to address those things. But I don't think that I think that the NRA, I almost felt like when I was listening to their press release that they weren't trying to shoulder any potential blame. And I guess I'm willing to, even as a lover of video games, a lover of media and movies, and I can at least accept that some people could, playing video games like this or watching certain types of movies could affect how they view things, and it could desensitize them to things, or even make uh, the possibility of them doing something like this more real or more likely. And I'm willing to at least shoulder an aspect of that. But I felt like the NRA wasn't willing to shoulder anything.
Well, it seems like in the modern world, like when an organization, when something like this happens, it sounded to me more like they weren't speaking out about Sandy Hook as much. I mean, in the beginning, their condolences and it all sounded very sincere, and I'm sure it was. But after that, they follow it up with a long speech that's basically defending what they always talk about. You know, it's not about the bigger issue in general. It's these are the reasons why you shouldn't uh, affect what we want to do negatively. In fact, here are some reasons why you should give us more. And many organizations will do that. They'll turn things around to make it more, bring the most benefit to themselves from it. As opposed to just looking at it in an unbiased way. I mean, and nobody can really look at something like this in an unbiased way because it's going to bring out a lot in everybody. But instead of trying to, okay, so talking about how, you love video games, we both love video games, both love movies, things like that. If someone was to propose, this school violence, I feel like maybe we should relook at our rating system for both video games and movies. That's something that is like I wouldn't have thought about this before, but after just hearing you, I would say, okay, I think maybe that is a good idea. I'm not sure if I'm going to be happy with the results, but I think it's a worthwhile thing to look at. Obviously, for me, I well, not there are other issues that I think would come before that, but I'd be willing to look at that. But it didn't seem like with the NRA speech, like they were looking at anything as far as I don't want to say taking away any of their rights, but that would be contrary to what they work for, whether something like Sandy Hook happened or not. They're still preaching the same line. Maybe even try to use something like this to an advantage to further their goals. Which may or may not be morally repugnant.
Right. Well, I mean, here's here's the only would if somebody said we have um, significant evidence that suggests that because there are video games like Grand Theft Auto or video games like um, Mortal Kombat. I say Mortal Kombat and I laugh because they actually brought that up in the NRA speech. And Mortal Kombat, for those of you who know about the video game rating system, that video game rating system did not exist before Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back and what caused the whole outrage um, about video games and coming up with a rating system and everything. And the video game companies embraced that. I mean, you have a video game rating on everything. And honestly, I feel like that rating system is significantly better than the rating system that you have for movies.
I completely agree.
The rating system for movies, the people who make the movies and the people who rate the movies, they can kind of wheel and deal with each other and say, okay, I'll cut this scene. Will you give me a PG-13 rating instead, versus a rating of an R if I leave this scene in, or vice versa, NC-17 versus R. Um, and video game system rating system doesn't. I mean, it's very much like if it's got this, this is what it's rated. If it's got this, this is what it's rated. But I don't want to get off onto a topic about video game rating systems and movie, because that's a whole nother thing. I'd be willing if someone came to me and said, the cause of this is video games, and here's the evidence that lays it out, and I would be willing to say, okay, so what are we going to do to prevent this from happening in the future, and still try to keep things as fair as possible. And I would even say, you've got evidence that suggests that this is the case. Well, let's look at it. Let's talk about it. But I feel like the NRA, here's the entire association is the National Rifle Association. They support gun owners. I'm not personally a gun owner. I don't really want to own a gun. I'm not that interested in owning a gun, and I'll get into what I think about guns and everything maybe later in this podcast. But what is a gun for? I mean, what is it? A video game is for entertainment. A gun is for making something else not be alive anymore.
That is not, I mean, yes, that in many contexts is true, whether it is for, hunting, which is a very common reason to own a gun. And I don't own any guns either, but I do have friends that do. So yes, there's hunting. There is home protection, which isn't necessarily trying to take the life of someone else, but trying to protect your own. And I know plenty of people, ex-military, that just go to the firing range. They never use their guns for anything else. They go to the firing range. They enjoy it. I have fired guns in my life. There is something kind of visceral about it, that is like stress relieving. This is going to be odd. I will compare it to going to the driving range and getting a bucket of 100 balls and driving them into space.
Okay.
You shoot a target, you shoot some cans. There is some stress relief involved in that. I mean, it's nothing that I do on a regular basis. But yeah, I mean, I guess there are multiple reasons. I mean, you could just be a collector. I mean, someone could own like classic guns. You could be a fan of the history of the development of guns. Like someone could own older weapons, swords, axes, maces, things like that. So I think to classify it as, they're only there to kill is definitely sort of unfairly pigeonholing, all gun owners. It's not necessarily.
Well, I mean, I can respect what you're saying in regards to that. What I'm saying is the basic purpose of a gun, not why someone might own one, but the basic purpose, the why that weapon exists is what I was saying. I agree with you that and maybe this is a false trichotomy, if that word even exists. But I only see three reasons somebody could own a gun. For hunting, which I don't hunt. I'm not interested in hunting. I don't think I could actually kill an animal that way. Like for me, my food has to be processed, and I don't want to ever having seen its face. And maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe because I don't have that kind of connection with my food. But that's just me. I can't imagine doing that. Two would be home defense, or to protect yourself. And I'll kind of come back to that one, because that's the one where I have my own kind of ideas about. And then the third one would be collecting. And I would even say somebody who owns a gun just to fire at a firing range and would never actually ever even draw it on somebody could even be considered a collector. They're collecting more an experience rather than the actual weapon, but to a certain extent, they're still more of a collector.
A hobbyist in a general sense,
Right.
whether it's collecting or. There is the fourth reason, and it could probably fall under protection, but it's criminals, that actually use it, whether they're just a street level criminal that needs to have a gun just for protection against other criminals, or all the way up to like hitmen and things like that are going to use it for things like that. But I think that's outside, because protection is someone breaks into my house, I'm going to pull out my gun.
Right.
The criminal aspect is more obviously much more aggressive about it. It's, you're bringing it with the intent of, you're the guy breaking into the house. You know what I mean? So there is that. I mean, it's not a reason that either of us could probably very readily. You could probably more readily connect with owning guns as a hunter than you could owning guns, you know, because you're going to wave it around and
Right,
threaten
because
lesser
you need
people
a gun in
or
order to rob this bank, something to that
right, right.
effect. Yeah, I mean, I don't, I don't disagree. I would probably classify and the one under protection.
But do you think that this Sandy Hook tragedy is a gun control issue? Do you think, I mean, is that, I mean, obviously the NRA is trying to point us in a completely different direction, obviously. Um, but do you think that gun control, like, obviously there's a lot of things going on here and it's not a single faceted issue, but would you put gun control at number one?
Um, I would put gun control either as a very close number two or tied with number one, and what I would probably say um, is more important or just as important as gun control would be um, the demonization that we have with mental health conditions. I don't agree with the NRA's suggestion that we should have a national registry of people who are afflicted with mental health conditions. Um, but I do feel like that we treat people who have mental health conditions or people who have to take antipsychotics or people who have to take who have to deal with psychoses and uh, any kind of chemical imbalances and things like that. We treat those people either as second class citizens or as less than human. I think a lot of times, um, and I think because of that, they feel outside.
Right. And maybe even ashamed to get treatment or, talk to, be open about it.
Right.
Um, and I don't really know um, much about um, the individual who committed these crimes. Um, but I would agree. I mean, for me, mental health is number one. I think that because violent crime has dropped down every year for the past 19 years until last year. And the areas that it won up were more just like physical altercations, two people getting in fisticuffs, kind of battery, and not like the truly heinous violent crimes. That does not in any way take away from Sandy Hook and be like, oh, the numbers are down. So this is, obviously that's not true. I mean, I think that this is outside of the realm of normal violent crime.
Well,
Um,
that's not unlike shortly after Sandy Hook. I was listening to one of the radio stations I listened to, and there was a gentleman on there who he studies crime rates and things like that, and he had mentioned the fact that the amount of these mass killings has not increased over the years. It's roughly about the same as it has always been. This, we have um, more access to a lot of media that gets that kind of information out very quickly, and I think that kind of leads to people thinking that it takes place a lot more often. It's kind of like plane crashes. You know, thousands of planes fly a day, but you have one crash, in 3 or 4 or 5 years out of these thousands and thousands of planes that have flown and had no problems, and suddenly everybody's afraid to fly.
I mean, this does exist outside of normal violent crime. And I do, getting back a little bit on gun control, I think there are some areas where we could tighten it up. But, the problem is I feel like some people that are, extreme about gun control want to try to do something to make guns not exist anymore. You can't. It's been invented. They're so ingrained in our society. Um, I was doing a little bit of research on, gun control statistics, depending on, like the violent crimes versus gun control and things like that. And in many cases, in almost most cases from everything that I got to read, and I didn't study this. I was on the internet for, an hour. But the countries where uh, guns are banned or much more strictly controlled than us, their like violent crimes are significantly higher. And actually, there was something I read. I don't remember specifically. You know that senator or congresswoman that was shot a couple years ago. That was the first time. Um, I'm not remembering what the stat was. It was like the first time that there'd been like a public shooting of that magnitude in a state where people were able to carry guns, like where there was concealed carry. It was the first time in the history of our country, or something like that. I'm probably getting that a little mixed up, but basically, it was it's much more rare for there to be levels of violence in public situations when you don't know who in the 20 people on the subway might have a 38 snub nose revolver in their purse or tucked into a shoulder holster. It makes you way more hesitant. But if you're looking around going, the only way someone else here is carrying a gun is if they're a criminal, and you look around and you're like, oh, these are all normal people coming home from work. Obviously, if you're in the shoes of that criminal who's in that situation, you're going to have a little more confidence about pulling off a crime right then and there.
I don't have a problem so much with someone carrying a pistol. Uh, the 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 draw the where I think personally, where gun control could definitely be improved is I don't think we need uh, weapons can carry that have clips that hold 30 and 40 bullets. I don't see a point where you would ever need a weapon that can fire that many bullets, and in a lot of cases very quickly you can fire all of those bullets.
Oh yeah. I mean, from what I understand, if you know what you're doing, any weapon that can be semi or fully automatic is not that hard to convert. If you know what you're doing, it's not that difficult. If you buy an AK-47 that is set for semi-automatic fire, which for those that don't know, it's you pull the trigger, one bullet goes, semi-automatic. Most pistols that you see that aren't revolvers are semi-automatic. Pull the trigger, one bullet. Pull the trigger, one bullet. But can be easily, like for someone who knows, can be easily modified to full auto. So you can buy a semi-automatic weapon, buy uh, your clip that holds 30 shots in it, convert over your gun, and now you have a much more dangerous weapon. Not to say it wasn't dangerous to begin with, but you've now increased the danger that that weapon can offer many fold.
Right. And and then the other type of thing which and I guess I feel like I'm bringing these things up and I feel like they're talking points, but they're things that I've the little the as little um information that I have and knowledge that I have about this. These are things that make sense to me. uh I don't see a point for assault rifles, um, like the AK-47 or anything. And the way from what I understand, they classify these weapons as basically if the gun has a pistol grip on it, not like a pistol, but like a rifle that has a pistol grip, then that ends up classifying it as like a tactical weapon or an assault weapon. And that was another one where I'm like, why do you need a gun that does that?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, that seems like an arbitrary way to decide how to classify a weapon.
I think that
Um,
there is more involved in what makes an assault rifle or a tactical rifle, but it's the basic difference between like a hunting rifle where it doesn't have a pistol grip, um, versus something like an AK-47 or the AR-15, which I believe is the civilian version of like the M16.
Right, right. It's got a lot of designations over the
Yeah.
years, but yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I think, I agree, having a 45 bullet clip for your rifle, whether it's fully automatic or semi-automatic, is probably excessive. There's no hunting situation. There's no home protection situation, within reason at least. And there's no like rifle range situation where this is necessary. Um, but I think another aspect that for me, when we're talking about gun control, is the responsibility of the gun owners to properly store their weapons in a safe way, which is really expensive. It is very expensive to get a good safe, and then you need to install it in your house properly, because if you don't, if you have a friend who owns guns and they have a gun safe, don't do this because they're going to be really mad because you're going to mess up their wall. But you could probably go and like yank it out of their wall, and then you could throw it in the back of your car, and you can go home and spend as long as you want cracking into it, and then have all their guns and whatever other valuables they put in there. I mean, so I mean, it's you really need, and I mean, the Sandy Hook situation, I don't think that's quite the same, because from what I understand, the mother was an avid, she had guns. She'd go to the range. She brought her son with. So even if she had all these protections in place, he'd probably have the combination of the safe or whatever, he'd have all that information.
Well, not to
Um,
mention the
but
fact that, I mean, all of the weapons that he had were obtained legally.
but I believe they were
Were they?
hers.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure about that though. But either way, yes, they were obtained legally, whether she owned them or he owned them.
And so,
And
yeah,
either way, the safe storage of them wouldn't have prevented him from getting to them, I don't think. Um, but it's an important aspect. If you have guns, you need to be responsible. And I don't see any reason why, that can't be a part of it. I don't know what the responsibility, like the accountability, how that would be applied, because normally it seems like it would be too late. Like, hey, a horrible crime was committed with a gun that you owned. We're past the point of
yeah. I mean, it's if right,
accountability really having any weight.
right. I mean, at that point, it's like, okay, well, we're gonna fine you because you didn't have the proper safe. But it's like, what's the point? I'm like, me. I mean, maybe it'll deter you from not having the proper safe in the future.
But now it's too
Right.
late. I mean, is that, and how strict should, I mean, and I'm not the one to judge this, but should it be so strict that if that happens, if you are not cautious with your weapons and they disappear and you're unaware of it, you have not reported this to the police, and some random criminal commits a crime with it, you lose your right to own guns.
Right.
That right is taken away from you. Sorry. Um, we gave you this right. This right was yours to have, but you ruined it for yourself because you didn't take care enough, and because of your carelessness, A, B, or C happened, and sorry, that's it. I mean, I don't know if it's, I don't know. I'm not sure if that is just horribly extreme, or I mean, in either way, if laws like that were to be put into place, there would have to be such a, you couldn't be, by June June of 2013, everyone who owns guns needs to have all the proper storage and safes and everything, and be ready to be randomly inspected, or however you'd hold it, people accountable.
Which you couldn't
Um,
even do. I mean, because that would be a violation of. You can't just walk into people's house and inspect their, whether or not they've got a gun safe. All you can really do is they have to sign a paper that says, yes, I have these guns somewhere, in a safe kind of thing. Kind of, kind of like um,
Showing you have car
yeah,
insurance.
exactly, exactly. Yes, yes, I have
It's
car insurance. Yes, I'm signing a thing that says I have car insurance. But how many people just sign those things and they don't, or they have car insurance for the time when they sign their thing, and then they just let it lapse.
right, right. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess you could have that, and you'd have to show proof that you have purchased a safe. I mean, there could be a safe registry, and that has to correlate with the number of guns you have registered. If you don't have a safe that's adequate for the number of guns you have, and you didn't get it professionally installed, and it seems like a lot. Like if I was a gun owner and I was hearing me talking, I'd be like, man,
Well, that's right.
this.
That's what I was just thinking is like I'm not a gun owner, and I can at least understand how someone who is a gun owner can say, "Wow, that's quite an invasion of my privacy." But at the same time, there are I had heard somebody instead of to try to change the conversation from gun control to gun safety. It's not so much about controlling guns or controlling who owns guns. It's about controlling how safely those guns are utilized or kept. And I think to a certain extent, regardless of if we've got the right idea or if this is a gross misappropriation of um, people's freedoms and or lack thereof. Uh, I think it's at least worth talking about that. Hey, maybe there is an aspect of gun safety that we do need to address, and maybe just by addressing them, that in and of itself would make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things looking for something that's not trying to take the guns out of people's hands, but is kind of addressing some issue with gun safety. And again, I don't believe that in very many ways this is actually a gun control issue because even if tomorrow they made a law and everyone had to turn in their guns and people actually did, like the good citizens of this country, the criminals aren't going to turn in their guns. The criminals are going to still have guns. The criminals are going to still get more guns. So, there has to taking away the guns doesn't help unless you can go back in time and uninvent them, which is going to would change history so drastically that I don't even know what we'd have at this stage. It'd be a whole different thing. Um, you know, you can't go back that far. It's impossible. Too big of a country. Too much going on. And if you really look at the statistics, at least the ones I looked at, which again, we have no credentials, so I'm not an expert. It really seems from what I was looking at and what I read today that taking the guns away is going to make crime increase and not decrease. And I think that's an important thing to note and understand that it's probably much more important to have control over guns than try to take away guns to control people, you know?
Yeah, I was see it's and this isn't uncommon. You had mentioned that the stuff you had read seemed to indicate that the countries that have more stringent gun laws have more violent crime, but I've also heard the reverse. And so, but see, I couldn't specifically point out where I had heard it from, or compare, you know, where my information was coming from versus where your information was coming from. But I've heard the reverse for things like when a very similar thing had happened in Australia, then they had a huge revisit of their gun laws, and there's been a drastic reduction. Not necessarily. I don't. It might be just the terminology. Like there wasn't a reduction in violent crime, but there was a reduction in, um, mass killings, or there was a reduction in murder by guns or something to that effect. And so a lot of times with statistics and things like that, it's really how you spin it.
Right. It's the very specific, household incidences of gun violence have dropped by, you know, 300% since the new laws came into effect. It's a very narrow focus of crime. Doesn't make it true it doesn't make it less true. It's just, either way, the statistics I was looking at are probably bent to someone's perspective as well. They've at least found the statistics that look good to them, that fit whatever argument they're trying to make.
Which is one of
Um,
the biggest problems with statistics.
oh yeah,
I mean,
especially
yeah.
in the internet world, because it's hard to find truly unbiased. I mean, if it even exists, it doesn't. I mean, we're not unbiased. Even when I'm searching for something unbiased, I want it to be what I want. I want those statistics to match up with what I want to argue. If they don't, I'm fine with it. But there's that desire.
I mean, there's an old adage that says, no writer writes in a vacuum, and it's the same kind of thing. No thinker, no person, thinks or comes up with ideas in a vacuum. There will also be an element of bias towards or against certain positions or ideas. Um, the real challenge is always trying to see past the bias or recognize that the bias exists and trying to still see things from a different perspective. It's interesting. It would be nice to have. I wish that we had somebody that we could talk to who actually was a gun owner, um, to just kind of get their perspective, because I have heard some gun owners who do agree with some of the things I've said in regards to smaller clips and assault rifles, uh, and such, and those types of things. But there are also gun owners who disagree. Um, I don't think I could ever own a gun. Um, I've had this conversation with people in the past about owning weapons. My personal take, um, and as silly as this sounds, I stand by this 100%. I don't believe that I could ever own a gun. What I'm waiting for, and this might sound silly, but what I'm waiting for is a Star Trek style phaser, a weapon that can be fired multiple times that can stun. And I'm not talking like those tasers that you fire once and then you've got to reload and it takes time and you have to be within like 5 to 7 feet. Um, I'm talking about a Star Trek style phaser that fires, basically just like a gun, but it gives you the option to stun someone. And I think having a weapon like that is something I could have, because you wouldn't ever have to worry as much about, um, somebody finding the weapon and accidentally shooting themselves, or um, you hear a noise downstairs and you go to find out who it is, and thinking it's a robber in the dark, you fire and end up injuring or killing someone who you care about, who had lost their key and was sneaking in the window.
Yeah, I mean, you might never own a weapon of that caliber then, because I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe that technology is out there in the future. Um, I could see owning a gun. I don't. Um, I could though, depending on where I lived. But again, I don't have children. So I mean, for some people that goes either way, because that urge to protect your children could go to I need to own a gun because of that, or I don't want a gun in my house because of that. And I can see either side of that. But I could see, like if I moved somewhere that was farther away, like right now I live in the suburbs. I have a billion neighbors. Um, so here I'm not so worried. But if I lived, out of, out of ways, I would probably definitely end up owning a gun or two, maybe a shotgun and a handgun. Um, just because when you're that much more separated um, from your neighbors, there is a little more personal safety you need to take into account. Not that something can't happen right here in the suburbs, because it does. Um, but there's a little more um, with that extra distance, I might feel a little more comfortable. I'm not sure if I would or not, because I would also, if I lived in that situation, I'd also probably have a couple big dogs, which I think are way better protection than a gun on a daily basis. Um, but I think when we get down to it, though, I mean, because I feel like maybe we're kind of running out of time here a little bit for our podcast tonight. I did want to touch on, we talked a lot about guns, but the mental health aspect of this, I mean, is it video games? Is it um, movies? Is it guns? I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like we both agree that none of those three things are truly the thing to blame for what happened at Sandy Hook. I mean, obviously the person is truly to blame, when it gets right down to it.
Well, I
Um,
guess the way I think, yes, we're on the same page in regards to that. People, human beings, have been killing each other for centuries. Um, we were killing each other before guns. We were killing each other before swords and knives. We were killing each other before being able to, before picking up rocks. Um, I mean, it's kind of the nature of nature, just in terms of tribalism and um, the way the competition for resources just takes place. Um, and uh, I think that because of the kind of ideas that we put on people with mental health issues, people who are struggling with that, um, it it causes that the potential for this type of violence. I agree that if we addressed mental health in a more understanding, a more respectful sort of way, it would make I think that just taking those steps in that direction would make a huge kind of movement towards at the very least, these kind of mass killings, these kind of mass violence. Um, as somebody who um, I personally haven't had uh, a lot of mental health issues, but there have been people in my family who have had mental health issues, and when I'm talking with people and they're talking to me about things that they're struggling with or things that are either with their spouse or whether they're talking about things that they're struggling with their family or anything like that. I will say one of the first things I'll always say is, do you have you thought about going to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, or do you have someone that you can talk to about these things? Um, Aside from me, somebody who has a degree in this and understands much better how brain chemistry works and why you might be feeling these ways. And people always, I feel like they're afraid to get involved with a psychiatrist or a psychologist because, well, now they've got a problem. Now they've got this mental um, health issue. But if you broke a leg and I said, dude, you should go to the hospital, you wouldn't go, oh man, what the heck? How, you think I should go to the hospital? What, you think there's something wrong with me? You think I'm less of a person because I need to go to the hospital because my arm's broken? But we treat mental health issues like that. If somebody has a chemical imbalance in their brain, or they can't make certain kinds of connections, or can't develop certain types of relationships because of mental health issues, um, they or we treat them like they're less of a person, or that there's something wrong with them if they have to go get help for it.
right. Well, I think it can be much harder for people to understand. And mental health issues, I mean, there's such a huge gambit. It could just be, the house you were raised in. Your parents didn't really know, they weren't happy. They didn't know, weren't able to show you how to be happy. And now you're an adult and you're trying to figure out how to be happy. So you go see a therapist of one type or another just to sort of learn how to be happy, you know? I mean, which is no easy feat sometimes to, learn how to be happy if you don't know. All the way up to, you know, very extreme things where, like some of the things you were talking about earlier, where you have to take antipsychotics and multiple things and, like bipolar disorder. And there's a lot of stuff out there. And it's easy to, it's much easier for someone to understand oh, his or her leg is broken. They're going to have to wear a cast for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever, 3 months. And then their leg's going to be better. I understand this. This works. I get it. The other stuff, we don't. It's more abstract, so I think it's harder for people to just wrap their minds around. At least in comparison to like a broken leg or I have the flu. I need bed rest and I need fluids and whatever other old wives cure that you come up with. I need to suck a lemon at 4 in the morning for 3 days in a row and I'll be fine. Um, but mental health issues, there is a huge stigma around it, and part of it is the mystery. I think, because it's not as cut and dry. Oh, you broke your leg. How long do you have the cast? It's not that easy. It's you can't you know empathize with people or whatever it is. Like, or sometimes you wake up and you're sad even though your life is awesome, and it's such a burden that you can't even get out of bed. That's much harder to like understand and you know empathize with empathize probably isn't the right word, but to really know what to do. If someone's leg is broken, hey, let me, you want another drink? I'm getting up. That's easy. If someone's dealing with like manic depression, that's harder to deal with. But that, it's going to take us, if we could start to make that jump, it's going to take us a generation to begin to change that. I mean, it's along the lines of, and I don't want to compare it to this because it doesn't equate quite right, but racism, where it takes a long time. Even when I was in school, when I was a kid, late 70s, early 80s, the difference in people as the generations have passed, have progressed, is clearly apparent. It is completely obvious in the way most people interact. I still see, in the industry I work in, every now and again, I still see some just like sickening racism, and it is almost always out of people that are like 60 or older. There's just this like this pure like if I have you have this very racist person, and then I have you know a server who is not white, no matter like what they are, just they are not Caucasian, and just the way they will sometimes treat those people. But it takes time, and that's it's fading. It's like this older generation now still kind of holds on to it in a way that you don't see much in the younger people. Like people in their 20s, there's always going to be ignorant people, but it's just whittled down. It'll take 10 years, 20 years to make any legitimate and reasonable progress in this. But we got to start soon because it's going to take us 10 years, 20 years to, make that progress. So the longer we wait, the longer till we can truly start reaping the benefits as a society and as individuals. I mean, if you have a problem, if you're feeling, I feel like you have enough life experience in this area, having known people that have struggled with things, that if it did come to the point where you needed to get that help, you would, and you wouldn't feel any shame around it. You know, I, s- I was in therapy for a while, just for stuff like just personal relationships. I was struggling with. It was never anything that I needed medication for, but it changed my life and my ability to, develop better relationships and realized when I was like closing people off and sort of isolating myself from people, just scared of being hurt and, abandonment issues and blah, 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 and a bunch of terms, that I just personally went through. But that time was priceless to me, and I don't just bring it up out of the blue. But whenever the subject comes up, whether it's workers I'm working with or a situation like this, I there is that like part of me that wants to hesitate from talking about it, but I always just jump past that hesitation because I'd rather talk about it. And maybe in me talking about it, to maybe one of my younger workers, they're going to come to a point in their life where maybe, that is the right thing for them. And hopefully, possibly, me having had that conversation with them can at least be helpful in having them do that, whether it's something, I don't want to say what I did was insignificant, but in the overall realm of things, it was smaller things than some people I'd known that have dealt with much, much bigger things. But whether it's something, smaller, more basic, if you will, or something that's really expansive that, could take a lifetime, they're going to take that opportunity, maybe take that jump, take that first step, start talking to somebody, and it could make a huge difference in their life, or maybe even be more understanding of just the process in general.
I think that you are hitting the nail right on the head in regards to um, just talking about it. I mean, once we kind of get that kind of thing started, I think that makes a huge difference. Once people start talking about it, once it becomes something that um, we feel at least more comfortable talking about and less afraid of addressing those things, um, will make huge strides towards it being less of a taboo, less of a thing that we want to keep behind closed doors. Uh, I don't want to go into any more because I think you summed up very well the very end very, very much. And I think that's a great place to stop. Thanks again, James, for a great podcast with me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, not a problem. I'm really enjoying these. It's number 4. So that means we've made a full month of these already. And the next one is going to be recorded in 2013, which is kind of neat if you think about it.
All right, guys, we'll see you next year.
I have a safe and happy New Year's, guys.